This reading is from Job 42, verses 1 through 6 and 10 to 17. Then Job answered the Lord, I know you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Hear, and I will speak. I will question you, and you declare to me. I have heard of you by hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he had prayed for his friends. And the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then there came to him all his brothers and sisters and all who had known him before, and they ate bread with him in his house. They showed him sympathy and comforted him for all the evil that the Lord had brought upon him, and each of them gave him a piece of money and a gold ring. The Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning, and he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He named the first Jemimah, the second Kiza, the third Karen-Happuch. In all the land there was no woman so beautiful as Job's daughters, and their father gave them an inheritance along with their brothers. After this, Job lived 140 years, and saw his children and his children's children 4 generations. And Job died, old and full of days.
When my daughter Kara was about 14, we went for a walk after we had a hearty Thanksgiving meal. And being clergy, I thought, well, maybe I ought to check in with her on how she's doing spiritually. So I asked her, I said, Kara, what are you thinking about God these days? Without skipping a beat or missing a step, she says, Mom, whatever you think, I don't. And she And she said, you think you're one with God. I know I'm not. So I said, well, honey, you can think that all you want to. It doesn't change what it is. But anyway, I knew she was simply following her job description as a 14-year-old, not to be me. So whatever I thought, she didn't. Is that clear? So it was a fun time. So I think her theology, her God language at that point was more focused on her separation from God, the distance between the divine and the human, and then mine was more focused at that point on the other direction, and both are true. We are one with God, and we're separate. Are many of you familiar with Bette Midler's song, From a Distance? Remember that one some years ago? From a distance, the world looks blue and green, the snow-capped mountains white. From a distance, the ocean meets the stream, and the eagle takes to flight. And then it goes into the chorus. God is watching us. God is watching us. God is watching us from a distance. So one of the aspects of our Christian faith is that we believe God is omniscient or all-knowing, all-seeing. God sees us, even though we run around most of the time, we're not seeing God. We're not even thinking that. In the Hebrew Scriptures, the story of Job and his woes, his troubles, his huge losses caused him, a righteous man, the Bible tells us, to seek even harder to see God. Why? He's trying to figure out why God would allow all these things or do all these things or whatever. The story of Job is often great grist for the mill of reflection and discussion when we are wondering those times in our lives, why? Why has this happened? So this week's reading has Job solidly in what the 12-step fellowships call being right-sized. Being right-sized about how you see yourself, your self-image, is really important in recovery. It's important not to be arrogant or grandiose, on the one hand, inflating your sense of yourself, or too low in self-esteem, or too self-effacing and self-deprecating. So being right-sized means that you see yourself as you really are, as with your light and your shadows, with your gifts and your gaffes and your mistakes. You know, Kathy Yelly talked with us a couple of weeks ago in our dialogue message. She was, sharing about her quest as a disciple of Jesus Christ for humility. And I would call that right-sizedness. So one way to look at seeing ourselves as we really are, as our Creator sees us, would be a directional way. Essentially, in our text for today, it's God to Job. Newsflash, you are here, I am there. Oh God, please help me find my way. Help me know which way to go. Have you ever prayed that? Have you ever petitioned God like that? Wanted to know what to do, which way to go, what path to take? Most of us probably have, especially when we're facing major discernments and decisions in life transitions. What should I be when I grow up? Should I take this job even though I'm not passionate about it? God, whom should I marry? Should I move to this state or that, this city? Like Lloyd Baker recently had to discern whether or not to move back to Ohio to be near his daughter. What is God's will for your life? And if the divine would just tell you, you'd do it right away, wouldn't you? I mean, like, you wouldn't miss a beat. You're looking for that elusive, divine, directional GPS, short for Global Positional System. Anybody know what a IDEO is? You heard the word IDEO? It's a spatial locator connected to the GPS thing. It's like that arrow that points to a red X on a map and it says, you are here. Now, when you walk into the mall and you look at the map kiosk, you orient yourself in relation to the store you're headed toward with the IDEO arrow. You are here. So then you figure it out from there. Every time you use a computer, you've got that little thing that tells you where your pointer's moving. It's here. And when you sign important real estate or legal documents, you ever had those little yellow stickies on there saying sign here? GPS, which stands for Global Positioning System, provides the ultimate IDEO for the planet. So the GPS receivers use satellites to track your location to within a foot or two. No matter where you are in the world, you are here. Now, what if our lives had a built-in spiritual, emotional, and mental GPS? How nice would that kind of IDEO be in all kinds of situations? Like if you were out in a crowd and you lost your child or your grandchild or your parent, if you were a child, how would that feel to be able to, find them because you had that tracking? How do you find your way through a confusing relationship conversation? How do you find God's will for your life? The theme song to the 1980s classic sitcom Cheers said it all. Making your way in the world today takes everything you've got. Taking a break from all your worries sure would help a lot. And Job would say, you got that right. Throughout the book, he's endured all these difficult trials and losses and less than helpful advice from his friends. So he wanted to break from it all in terms of a little divine clarity. He's been crying out to God for an IDEO on where am I and where's God in all this? Where is God in all this confusion? In chapter 13, verse 22, he said, then call and I'll answer, or let me speak and you reply to me. He said, and then Job says, oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might even come to his dwelling. He's ready to go look God up at home, to get some answers. 23:3. Oh, that I had one to hear me, he said in chapter 31 and verse 35. Doesn't that reflect how we feel before God at times? Maybe that's why, Job has always been kind of relatable and earthy to most people. When the Lord's ways have been mysterious to Job, God didn't remain silent, forever. However, God didn't remain silent. In chapters 38 through 41, God gives Job a big fat IDEO, and right between the eyes, in no uncertain terms, God says to Job, Job, I am here, you are there. Don't ever be confused about that difference. So here's a little theology 101. If you were to take a piece of paper and you put a thick line in the middle of it, and on the one side you write God, on the other side you write my world, then you've just drawn an important piece of the Christian worldview, because only one side is subject to the other. We might, some people, sometimes we've treated God like a slot machine or something. Like if I put in the quarter, I can maybe get the answer I want. But there's only one side that's subject to the other. So this is the same line that's always been since the creation of the universe. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void. God created ex nihilo, from nothing. God, infinite intelligence, the unified field, the ground of being, the source, creative intelligent love. All the ways that in contemporary science they're beginning to talk about this. God always was. And we've been made along with the world around us. That's a big part of why we're in the climate crisis. We think we are separate from the world, but we were created along with the world. So the line is between the Creator and the created things, and we keep forgetting we're one of the created things. Don't overlook the simple fact that the line means there's a difference between God and us. And so this line means that God is all-powerful, but we're not. Omnipotent, that's the theological word for it. God is infinite, but we have limits. We're finite. God has purposes that will come to fruition, verse 2. They might come to fruition if they're in line with God's purpose and plan, ultimately, if we align with God as co-creators. So you remember all the things that Job lost in chapter 1 that Bert was referencing. His possessions, his home, his children, his wife. Rarely do we hear that it's God's will for us to lose money, lose comfort, lose a child. That's so hard for us to handle. We want God's purposes for us to involve giving. God's blessing us, always constant blessing, not taking. Or people will often take what they want to see happen and rubber stamp God's will language onto it. Well, God told me to do this, and God called me to do that, and God led me to do this. The things that follow these statements are sacred cows to us. But Job he got really immersed in the mystery of why, and he would have thought that would be bold indeed to claim such insight into God's purpose for us. Like I preached last Sunday, it's all the great mystery. So that's why the line also means that God is perfectly wise. The line that's drawn between us and God is that God is perfectly wise and knowledgeable. We are not. Verse 3. So the story of Job and his friends is that of several men trying to put together puzzle pieces to form a clear picture of God, to get God in that box and to answer the question, why? But some of the pieces were not given to them. We have this puzzle of life, and we don't have all the pieces. They could not reduce Job's suffering to trite answers, consistent patterns in human understanding. In that line of knowledge and understanding that divides us and God, human reasoning cannot cross over from us to ascertain God's side. Only divine revelation. We can't go figure God out, but God reveals God's self to us on this side of the line to give us a clue. I was thinking about it. Faith is basically irrational. Faith is irrational. It's not irrational, but irrational. Irrational means it's not based on or governed by reason. It's a whole different thing. It's beyond our reasoning. That's why it's faith. Irrational means it's lacking usual or normal mental clarity or coherence, and it's not endowed with reason or understanding. Our faith is not irrational, it's irrational. There are other ways to experience God besides some kind of linear proof. The journey given to Job was not to understand God and his ways. His journey was to be faithful, to continue to respond faithfully to God, even when he couldn't understand the puzzle, when he had pieces missing on that why puzzle. And so, in our passage today, we get Job's response to receiving his spiritual ideo. He confesses that he finally gets it. He knows both where he is and where God is. There's a line between them, and he comes to terms with that line. There are times in life when God gives us our ideos. I'm here, you're there. There may be a line that divides us from God in our holiness, motives, our future hopes, our financial priorities, anything where we're not in the same place as God. We've all got our own examples of where our ideal locators and God's are separated. And so that separation is God's way actually of saying, hey, look here, don't miss this. So how do we respond in those kind of situations? Do we lament the distance? Are we frustrated that God doesn't seem to want to move toward us? Or do we attempt to reason our way through so we can have God back in the box and understand God's ways? Those are all natural responses, but like Job, they aren't the things that God has given us to focus on. And so to respond in faith, pause to learn the things about that line that separates God and our world. But even when you don't have all the pieces to the puzzle, you can still accept God as God on God's terms. And then ask God, what would it be for me to respond faithfully? What is it you want of me for today, for tomorrow, for next week, pandemic or not? So in following God, that we know that our ideo locations can involve separation. Faith means knowing there's a line which separates our identity from God's, but faithfully closing that distance between us. And when we close that distance, I would, like I heard once, any one sermon is heresy. So what I just said is heresy, because there's other sermons that need to be preached that would have other pieces of the puzzle. No one sermon has the whole puzzle answer. God is beyond any presentation of God's aspects that could be given in that sermon. The message today is on the separation. It's on separation of humanity from the transcendence of God, it's called theologically. The awesomeness of God. And I'm going to preach in Advent, we'll be looking at the oneness, God with us. Emmanuel, God incarnated, embodied, God within. But all of it, God separate from us and God within us, it's all the great mystery, the both and. Thanks be to God.
Dance with the Spirit early in the morning, walk with the Spirit throughout the long day, work and hope for the new life upborn, and listen to the Spirit to show you the way.
Dance with the Spirit early in the morning, walk with the Spirit throughout the long day, work and hope for the new life upborn, and listen to the Spirit to show you the way. Dance with the Spirit early in the morning, walk with the Spirit throughout the long day, work and hope for the new life upborn, and listen to the Spirit to show you the